Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Sunday morning worship service of DuPage Unitarian Church, Universalist Church in Naperville, Illinois. More coffee, more coffee. I am Diane K. Gelder, a member of your Board of Trustees. We are so glad you are here, whether you are present in the sanctuary this morning or watching remotely. It is so good to be together. We welcome you to our church and invite you to get to know us better after the service. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another on our spiritual and religious journeys while holding ourselves in covenant through our shared 7 principles. The mission of DuPage UU Church is to gather as an inclusive community to grow in character, mind, and spirit, and to transform the world towards fairness, love, and compassion. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, wherever you are in the world, you are welcome here. I invite you to turn to someone you did not come with and greet them with a wave and a good morning greeting. And if you are online, we're done.
I light this chalice for the fourth source of our living tradition that draws from Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves.
Good morning and happy Easter. Welcome to this place of love, of communal flourishing. We enter this space to open our hearts, to expand our minds, and to see the sacred within one another. Come, let us worship together.
Please rise as you're willing and able, and join me in hymn number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
Please join me in the reading of our covenant. We come together to affirm our relationship with one another, our shared commitment to our Unitarian Universalist principles, and to our today's new church community. We recognize our agency and our connective power, and we accept our responsibility to be bold and courageous in relationship with each other, so that we may transform ourselves and the world.
Our vision of beloved community is rooted in the relationships we have with each other, our world, and creation. Each week we share joys and concerns with one another. I want us to celebrate these lovely Easter flowers given by Linda Zetterberg in celebration of Sherry Burlingame's birthday on April 14th. I also wish to bless our Muslim friends with a blessed Ramadan and our Jewish cousins with a lovely Passover, which they celebrated last week, but I feel like it's important to honor it when it happens. And I want to share that my heart is with the state of Tennessee and its legislature as it's struggling, clearly, with some issues around equality and gun control. And I just really want to name that I stand in solidarity with those who were removed. We absolutely need more people and more of us standing together. When the cares of the world weigh on us, may we find joy in our connections with each other and with the pleasures that life holds. Let us care for one another and ourselves in all the ways that we can, whether our joys and concerns were shared here or just remain in your heart. Know that your community is here for you. If you would just join me in a moment of silence.
It is time to gather. And before I share today's story with you, I want to point out that we have a order of service for kids now. So if you haven't gotten one, there are some here in front of the pulpit, but they're also in the back. And we have various markers and crayons throughout the sanctuary. And it's kids, for kids and those young at heart. So feel free to grab one if you want to keep your hands busy. So today I want to share with you the story of a man named Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy was born in a small town near Selma, Alabama, and after high school he became a soldier and fought in the Vietnam War. When he came home, he tried to live a normal life, like you or me. And one of the normal things he wanted to do was vote in elections, like for the President of the United States. Now, at that time, if you lived in one of the southern states of the United States and were African American, you could not register to vote. There were things in place that made it really difficult to vote. Sometimes they made you take a test that was really hard if you had not gone to school, like many people at that time. And sometimes they would bully or threaten to hurt you or your family. And sometimes they made you pay money to vote. And all these ways that kept people from voting were racist. They kept African American people from voting. Now, Jimmy Lee Jackson, like many African Americans, had tried to register to vote. He had tried many times, and each time was told he could not vote even though he was an American citizen and had fought for our country. So in 1964 and 1965, in Selma, Alabama, African American people, including Martin Luther King Jr., came together to peacefully march in protest. They wanted to vote, and so they marched to get the right to vote. Well, in February of 1965, Jimmy Lee, his sister, his mother, and his 82-year-old grandfather decided to march. And And that night, as they marched, the town leaders decided to turn off the streetlights to make people confused and scared. And the peaceful protesters ran away into people's homes and through the streets. So Jimmy Lee and his family went to a local cafe where they were followed by some policemen. Jimmy Lee tried to protect his mother and grandfather by standing in front of them, but the police hurt him, and one of the police shot him in the stomach. He went to the hospital where they tried to help him. Martin Luther King Jr. went to visit him in the hospital, and he said, "I will never forget, as I stood by his bedside a few days ago, how radiantly he still responded, how he mentioned the freedom movement, and how he talked about the faith that he still had in his God. Like every self-respecting Negro, Jimmy Jackson wanted to be free. We must be concerned not merely about who murdered him, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderer." Well, Jimmy Lee Jackson died 4 days after he was shot, and he was only 26 years old. He died because he wanted to vote, but couldn't because he was black. Even though he was asking for the right in a peaceful way by marching, the police still hurt and killed him because they were told that they had to keep black people from voting. Martin Luther King Jr. and others who were marching wanted to change the system that allowed racism to exist. Today, many more people can vote, but still not everyone. Many laws still make it difficult for people to vote. And many of our police officers are still not trained well, which means that black and brown people get hurt and killed more often than white people. So as Unitarian Universalists, it is important that we remember Jimmy Lee Jackson and many other people who died because of the color of their skin, and work to bring justice to the world. Let's sing to the children. Giving of our treasure is how we reciprocate the many gifts we are given by this community. Your contribution supports the programs and operations of DuPage UU Church. Giving is also how we live our values in the world. Each month, we share our offerings with an organization nominated by the congregation and selected by the special offering team. During April, the special offering will benefit the Animal Rescue Foundation, nominated by Jenny Hobbs. ARF is a no-kill, all-volunteer, foster-based organization dedicated to rescuing and rehoming homeless dogs and cats into loving forever homes, including animals that other rescue groups cannot help due to the advanced age or exceptional medical needs of the animals. ARF helps save 1,000 plus animals each year. They are completely dependent on donations and fundraising and make a huge impact not only in our local communities, but by taking in animals from other counties and even other states that would otherwise be euthanized. The offering is given and received in spirit of generosity and gratitude.
Hoy acepto seguirte, dejar viejas certezas atrás, arriesgar mis verdades, abrazar la inquietud, ir más allá. Tus brazos extendidos marcan el horizonte al final. Encuentro tu mirada, escapo del temor que me ancla en mi barca. Pero dudo y espero que el viento sople menos, el sol alumbre más. Surge valentía, esquiva las balas de este corazón que debe cruzar las fronteras que ahorita somos tiene allá mar adentro sobre agua caminar. En tus huellas mis pasos, en tus manos la fuerza del mar. Como tú quiero amar las miserias del mundo, como tú a mi debilidad. Pero dudo y espero que el viento sople menos, que el sol alumbre más. Surge valentía, esquiva las balas de este corazón que debe cruzar
The following reading is an excerpt from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Word Lecture at the 1966 Unitarian Universalist Associations during the General Assembly. I talk a great deal about the need for a kind of divine discontent. And I always mention that there are certain technical words within every science which have become stereotypes and cliches. Modern psychology has a word that has become common. It is the word maladjusted. We read a great deal about it. It is a ringing cry for a modern child psychology. And certainly, we all want to live well adjusted. But I must say to you this evening, my friends, that there are some things in our nation and in our world to which I'm proud to be maladjusted. And I call upon you to be maladjusted, and all people of goodwill to be maladjusted to the things until the good society is realized. I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few and leave millions of people perishing in a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of prosperity. I must honestly say, however, much criticism it brings, that I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and to the self-defeating effects of physical violence. In a day when Sputniks and Geminis are dashing through our outer space and ballistic missiles are carving highways of death through the stratosphere, no nation can win a war. It is no longer a choice between nonviolence and violence. It is a choice between nonviolence and non-existence. The alternative to disarmament under a strong UN, the alternative to a suspension of nuclear tests, the alternative to negotiate a settlement in Vietnam, and the point of coming to that condition of not bombing the North, the alternative to admitting China may well be a civilization plunged into the abyss of annihilation. And our earthly habitat can be transformed into an inferno that even the mind of Dante could not imagine. Yes, I must confess that I believe firmly that our world is in dire need of a new organization, the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjusted. Men and women of maladjusted as the prophet Amos, who in the midst of injustices of his day, cry out in words that echo across the centuries. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. As maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who had the vision to see that this nation could not survive half starved and half free. As maladjusted as Thomas Jefferson, who in the midst of an age amazingly adjusted to slavery, cried in the words lifted to cosmic proportions. We who hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among this are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As maladjusted as Jesus of Nazareth, who could say to the men and women of his day, "He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword." Through such maladjusted men, we will be able to emerge from the bleak and desolated nights of man's inhumanity into the bright and glittering daybreak of freedom and justice.
Please rise as you're willing and able, and join us in singing hymn number 269, Lo, the Day of Days is Here.
the years, Easter has become a time for me that is focused on the changing of seasons, of new beginnings. I've steered away from the Christian understanding. Theologically, I struggle with the message of Jesus saving humanity from sin so that we will not be damned to hell. I struggle with this partly because I don't believe in hell, and partly because I understand salvation and sin differently than the dominant Christian understanding. This Easter, however, the Jesus story is one that's close to my heart. The humanist Jesus, that is. The one seeking justice for a people. The Jesus who believed that humanity must work with the divine toward liberation. The biblical scholar John Dominic Crossan writes of this Jesus that Jesus called for a nonviolent resistance to Rome and just distribution of land and food. He was crucified because he threatened Roman stability, not as a sacrifice to God for humanity's sins. This Jesus is the one that I'm holding right now as empire seeks to destroy everything that is around us. Last week, I participated in an interfaith storytelling event at Lewis University. I spoke of this Jesus and the story that I'm about to tell you as well. And afterwards, someone asked me what I meant when I used the word empire. This question is important because empire has not changed from the Babylonians of the Hebrew Scriptures to the Roman Empire to Chinese dynasties, European powers, and to our own American imperialism. Empire is that which dominates and holds power. Empire is homogeneous, which means it denies diversity and seeks sameness. Empire is crushing to those who are perceived as weak, which are often those who hold the priority of people over power. Empire is used in ways that bring death, not life. An empire leaves a trail of martyrs in its wake. Jesus was not the first of the martyrs. There was senselessness in his death, and there was power in it as well. He was one small man who saw a vision of a better world. He was a man who was maladjusted, as King wrote in our reading, maladjusted to despair, to the message of empire. In theory, his death meant little to the Roman Empire except to stop a revolution. On the other hand, his death was the catalyst for a movement, if you look at the early Christian church, that said it was more important to act in just ways that prioritized community, that prioritized the equitable and just treatment of all than to hoard power. His legacy was a thorn in the side of the Roman Empire until its eventual destruction. Today, we know as a faith movement that has moved away from the doctrines of the roots of our Christian tradition, that things went wrong when that tiny sect of Judaism, which became Christianity, joined forces with empire under the Emperor Constantine's rule. Today, we live in a country that is living proof that empire and religion in the form of Christian nationalism does not work. It fails to see that religion is meant to be a conscience, the ethical critique of empire. Religion is meant to be the association for the advancement of creative maladjustment. Instead, right-wing Christianity uses empire to corrupt the message of its Jewish founder to gain power and dominance, to create homogeneity. The legacy of Christianity and empire have left many, many martyrs in its wake, from the women Christian mystics like Joan of Arc and Marguerite Porete, martyrs who opposed one vision of religion, such as our own ancestor, Michael Servetus, Martyrs who stood against Christianity and empire on social issues like John Brown or MLK. In our own Unitarian Universalist tradition, we have many martyrs who have simply stood in front of empire and its agents. The Unitarian minister, Reverend James Reeb, was one such man. Reverend Reeb was a man of principle who understood that standing against empire meant living a life committed to people and causes that prioritize the inherent worth and dignity of all. He was maladjusted too. He and his family lived in neighborhoods that were historically Black and poor, sending their children to schools where they were likely the only or amongst the few white children present because they believed in integration. He worked for the American Friends Service Committee. He had marched with King multiple times. In 1965, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sent a telegram that I have actually literally held in my hands when I found it in the archives of my previous congregation. A telegram to religious leaders across our nation asking them to march against hate across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and for voting rights. And Reeb answered that call. Arriving in Selma, Reeb went for dinner with his friends and fellow ministers, Reverend Clark Olson and Reverend Orloff Miller. As they exited the restaurant, the three ministers were attacked by white supremacists. Reeb was left unconscious, taken to a hospital, and died 2 days later. Unlike Jesus' death, a brown Jew in a rural province of Rome, whom the Roman Empire could easily sacrifice to maintain not only order, but to keep its homogeneous sense of self and power, the American Empire found itself in a torn position. You see, Reeb's death could not be abided as Reeb was white. It could not be seen that a white male minister would die, especially in the cause of racial justice. Jimmy Lee Jackson's story, you heard moments ago, a martyr of empire in Selma as well, weeks before Reeb's death, could be sacrificed and ignored, but Reeb could not. Empire is insidious this way. White Christians in northern states could be appalled at the treatment of blacks protesting in the South, even when the brutality reached the level of death. But when the line of race was crossed, that is when Reeb, a white male minister, was killed, a person whose existence embodied the ideal of empire, that could not be ignored. President Johnson would introduce the Voting Rights Act weeks later and sign it into law later that summer. The stories of martyrs at the hands of empire is with me these days. In these days of anti-trans, anti-LBGT legislation, in days in which Black lives do not matter, in the days of the Nashville 3. It's sitting with me because empire is slick and savvy. Empire knows how to navigate the situation for its best interest, and it has the power to manipulate the message for that reason. Yes, empire had to concede power in the face of Reeb's death, but that power just simply took a new form of oppression, such as the school-to-prison pipeline or the war on drugs. Reeb's death won a small battle, but the war continues. And in the aftermath, the story of Jimmy Lee Jackson is ignored, as is the story of Unitarian lay leader, mother of 5, Viola Luzo, shot and killed later that summer while driving blacks to register to vote. The martyrs we know of give us strength in the midst of empire, but there are so many whose names we might not ever know. for whom empire has uselessly thrown away their right to exist. In this moment, Jesus' story of Easter, that one brown-skinned Jewish man with humble origins, might bring us hope. In this moment, Reeves, Jackson's, Luzo's stories bring us the hope of resistance. And these are what I'm clinging to. This is what I am holding in this season. The martyrs of empire are so vast and mostly unknown to us because this is one of those slick and savvy things that empire does. It keeps the memory of the martyrs hidden, or because it rewrites the history. Jesus' story has been rewritten by Christian nationalists, hoping to claim Jesus as a reason for their power and prosperity, hoping to use Jesus as a weapon. It is actually our responsibility to reclaim the real Jesus, to reclaim the real James Reeb and Viola Luzo, to reclaim the real Jimmy Lee Jackson. It's our job to shout these stories and these legacies as resistors to empire. The early Christian churches knew that their only hope of survival was to come together. In the face of empire, those early Christian churches taught and lived as the revolutionary Jesus had taught them. In their tiny communities, they chipped away at the power of empire, resisting the uniformity of Rome, holding to the subversive attitude of caring for the poor and the hungry and for each other. This is the message of Easter. In community, we remember the stories. We can encourage one another to bring beloved community here to earth. In community, we stand against empire like the martyrs of a legacy of hate did. In community, we can resist the hate and power of guns, racism, classism, and anti-LGBTQ legislation. In community, we resist in solidarity as maladjusters to empire's message and power. This Easter, may the martyrs for justice who resisted empire bring our community a renewed sense of commitment to transform ourselves and the world through resistance to injustice. May we remain maladjusted to the message of empire.
Please rise as you're willing and able and join us in singing hymn number 268, Jesus Christ is Risen Today.
Oh
following along in the hymnal, you might have noticed that there were some words that were changed. I kind of rewrote some of those, yeah. Sometimes we need to have a stronger message. For all those who celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, may this day be another affirmation of divine love and promise. For those who see the eternal story of spring and new life beginning, may you breathe deeply of a season of promise and hope. For all who experience despair or hopelessness this Easter, may you find that the darkness and depression a doorway to light and warmth that offers you freedom. And for all of us, together we can do what no one isolated person can do. Rolling the heavy stone aside reminds us that we are far more powerful than we could ever be on our own. And together, we can be powerfully maladjusted in the face of injustice. May it be so.
Before we extinguish the chalice, I would like to remind those here that there is an Easter egg hunt right after the service for the kids. We have paper sacks for those that do not have their own baskets. We will line up at the back door in Creeves Hall from youngest to oldest, and I will release you in staggered segments. And I will also give direction on how the Easter egg hunt will work. So please join me in the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish the light of this chalice, but not the light in our hearts. Until we meet again, may the warmth of our community carry you.